So there's a football match coming up. You're looking at all of the stats. The home teams won 4 out of 4. The away teams lost 4 out of 4. So you're sort of thinking, oh, maybe I'll favour this team. What stats should you use if you're looking at a football match? That's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So if you go to a website like the BBC, Sky, pretty much anybody now, you'll see at the bottom of a match preview, key stats it says. And the key stats will say something like, so-and-so has won when they've played away at this venue, they haven't lost, or they haven't won, or there's been a large number of draws, or they don't score this many goals, and all these key stats pop up at the bottom telling you things that are relevant to that particular match. But they're not, because generally the stats are historical items that bear no relevance to the match that's in front of you. Matches between teams vary and interlock in quite complex ways. And looking at historic results, such as you find on sites or at the bottom of summaries and match previews and stuff like that, very often don't bear any relevance to the outcome of the particular result. So you'll be interested to know that I don't use them. It's interesting really, because if you go back many years ago, I started digging around inside football matches and trying to understand how football matches should be priced and how the outcomes of matches occur. And the thing that was surprising then was I discovered all sorts of little interesting things. And I wrote to a magazine and said, would you like to do an article on this? And I got a letter back basically saying no, because it's incredibly dull and interesting. And you look at stats today and they're everywhere. There's so many of them. You're sometimes spoilt for choice. And there's just hundreds of sites detailing loads of stuff. But unfortunately, most of it is completely irrelevant, unfortunately. And part of the reason for this is that most of the stats that are generated are based upon historical data. They inherit a bias in terms of the way that they're interpreted. But also, the creation of these stats is there to stimulate you to do something. So typically, people offer bet stimulus services where they throw stats out that will get people to actively engage. It's like, so-and-so has done this. It's like, oh yeah, so they have. Right, I'll have a $5 on that. And that's where a lot of those stats come from. They're not actually interested in the prediction of the outcome of the match at all, really. And the fact is, most people aren't. Most people just can't be bothered to go through that pain and suffering that comes with accurately trying to predict the outcome of an event. They just want some simple little stats, and then they'll jump on them and away they go. Now, the fact is that there is an underlying core that sits within a football match that allows you to pick out any number of different types of interesting statistics from the match. So using 2 variables, I can actually describe the chance of the home team winning, any of the correct scores, the away team winning, the chance of a draw, when that first goal is likely to be scored, if that first goal is scored by whom. If the home team is 1-0 up at half time, it will describe the chance of the away team coming back into the match at some point. There I had the number of corners, the number of likely shots on target, just 2 variables describe the whole thing. But you very rarely see people actually talking about them in any great deal of information. But before I talk about those, let's go back to where we suffer from in terms of the historical stats. So let's say we have an unlimited deck of cards. Let's say that we can just deal as many cards as we like infinitely into the future, and there's an infinite pack. If we keep turning over those cards, it's very likely at some point a sequence will occur. So we'll go black, red, black, black, red, 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 black, 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 red, 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 red. But the fact is that every time that sequence occurs, when you turn the next card in an infinite deck of cards, there's no increased chance of a black or a red. It's completely random as long as you've shuffled the deck and there's no funny business going on. Now, I've actually got a great follow-up video to show you how a completely random deck of cards can sort of be made unrandom by well, I won't go into depth as to how it's done, but basically I guarantee you, if I show you this method, you can win money from anybody despite the fact that the turn of the next card is completely random. And it's all part to do with the way that people mix up sequences. But also, you know, the gambler's fallacy is a common thing that's described in mathematics and probability, and it's basically the feeling that if you have a sequence of long periods of red or black, that somehow that influences the outcome of the next turn of the card. And the fact is, it doesn't. Just the same as when you're in the roulette and there are 6 blacks come up, it doesn't influence the outcome of the next red or black. And as a consequence, the gambler's fallacy permeates permanently. You know, a string of winning favourites, people will start betting on the 8th favourite. A string of losers will alter people's behaviour. But the fact is that what's happened in the past does not necessarily predict what's going to happen in the future. But a lot of people will bet on it. And that's where the stats on football do lead you astray, because they're designed to stimulate you to perform an action. And that is because of the sequencing of patterns and trends within it, when in fact that's an irrelevance in terms of where you're going to predict the next match. So what are the 2 key variables that I use to predict everything within a football match? Well, it's really simple. It just boils down to goals. How many goals is the home team going to score? How many goals is the away team going to score? Because if you can accurately predict both of those things, which you can do, then everything works out from within there. So if the home team is going to score X number of goals and the away team is going to score Y, if the away team scores a goal, then that metric is still present within the match, and then the home team is expected to score this many goals, and therefore the chance of them coming back into the match is going to be related to the difference in goals between the 2 teams and how many goals have been scored and how much time is left on the clock. So you can actually predict all of that just using the amount of goals that the home team scores and the amount of goals that the away team scores. So when I do the football ratings, that's what I'm doing. I'm working through all of the detail in terms of how many goals are likely to be allocated to the home team, how many are likely to be allocated to the away team, and how many are going to be scored overall. And from that key information, everything spins off of that. So if you don't believe me, well, I've been doing it for God knows how many years, and it works beautifully. But the fact is, most stat sites are not focused on that at all. So if you know how many goals are likely to score, you can forecast 0-0, 1-1, 2-0, 3-0. You can group all of those scores together to create the match odds, market, over and unders, and then you can start to look at other things such as when the time of goal is going to occur. And if a goal occurs at this time, what's the likelihood of another goal at this point until the end of the match? So yeah, if you're going to research and look at football in great depth, then I suggest that's where you put your focus in. Study intensely how many goals are going to be scored and who is likely to score them. Look at these scoring stats. Ignore the results because the results don't really tell you that much information, because it could have been played against any number of teams. And you can go many, many levels deeper, but when you look at football, essentially what I do is just focus on the number of goals that are likely to be scored and who's going to score them. That tells me absolutely everything that I know. From that I can predict time of first goal, what happens if a goal goes in, what the chance of the other team coming back into it. When the match is underway, I then start looking to see if my projection before the match is matching what I'm actually seeing during the match. Because if it isn't, then I need to reassess everything that I've done and look at it from a different angle if the match is turning out differently from what I originally forecasted. So yeah, when you're looking at football, you can pretty much ignore all sorts of other stats, such as teams beginning with the letter B tend to beat teams beginning with the letter L, because it's an irrelevance, or the fact that so-and-so has won X amount of times in a row or hasn't won on this ground for 20 years. What you need to do is focus right in on those basics, and that will give you everything that you need to know to successfully forecast what's going to happen in a football match.